butter on top, and that's it. Show of hands. Anyone? Simple and plain soup? No? Okay, great. Does anyone like to add sugar to their cornbread? I do, yes. Another one, and 3. Okay, we are split evenly. For those of you who are taste. Yes. It was nice and moist. We love moist. Anyone else? Did you like your cornbread? It was okay. It was okay. What could have made the cornbread better? More or less sugar, do you think? More sugar. More sugar. Anyone feel differently? Less sugar?
Yeah, I was like,
Oh, interesting. Love it. This feedback is so helpful. If you did not like your cornbread, please feel free, leave a bad Yelp review for Dallas Barbecue. I only go there for their Hennessy wings personally. Most people's taste in cornbread is shaped by where they grew up. If you grew up outside of the southern United States, cornmeal can be less sweet, thus the addition of sugar to the mix. And at one point in history, molasses was added by some to their cornbread. And one chef even stirred in fresh fruit and sugar, which to me is sacrilegious. Cornbread is not cake. Please stop trying to make it a dessert. And you all were invited here because I'm in the process of preserving our history, our recipes, the unique regionalism of this dish, and the way the magic we create when we come together. This store-bought cornbread was made from ingredients indigenous to North America and Africa, brought over by our ancestors without electricity, without the ingenuity we have today to make something out of nothing. Me llamo Arturo Schomburg. Some of you may have heard of me, most likely because my name is on the side of a building in the greatest neighborhood on earth. No, it is not Midtown Manhattan, where we are today. It is Harlem, USA. The Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture is on 135th Street in Harlem, New York, and it contains over 12 million items related to Black history from across the world. And when I say Black, with a capital B, of course, I know some of you may shudder, worrying that my story, this story, may make you feel smaller. When I say history, I mean all of our history. History from Russia, England, and France, from every part of Europe and Asia, and every part of our planet. The Schomburg Center is the culmination of my work and my legacy. And I cannot thank you again enough for being here. This year, 2024, I turned 150 years old. Yes, clap it up for your elders. That saying, Black don't crack, has always been true. And I thought this milestone year would be one of celebration. Instead, it has become one of the edited theology. Look at the people in this room. People from every walk of life, from every economic class, which is no surprise as we are in New York City, the most diverse city in the world. More languages spoken here than anywhere else. More ethnicities living together, crammed into the subway. No matter how many times we hear, train traffic is ahead of us. Please be patient. A place where people live multiple identities, blending their cultures together into a one-of-kind stew only they can replicate. And I love a good food metaphor. You can learn a lot about someone's culture by the food they eat and the history that went into putting that food on their plates. I am a historian, after all. I want you all to conjure in your minds the food you ate as a child. Maybe you need to close your eyes to do so. Can you remember what you ate? Can you smell your food? Can you remember where you were when you ate it? Can you remember who you were with? And keep thinking about what food from your youth lives in your memory. For me, I'm thinking of Puerto Rico and its mofongo, Harlem and my wife's macaroni and cheese, and Brooklyn, and my third wife's sweet potato pie. Now that you're all hungry, does anyone want to share what food you thought of? Anyone willing to share? I see you laughing or covering your mouth.
Mexican. My mother is white.
I love this thing.
Would layer flour tortillas and taco meat made from seasoning packets and then black beans and other sort of burrito fillings, and then layer more flour tortillas like a lasagna, and then the top was covered in cheese, and then you bake it and you slice it like lasagna and eat it. Yeah, that sounds so good.
Coming to the Taco Bell menu very soon. Anyone else want to share what food from their youth they were thinking about?
Sure. Funny contrast. I'm thinking about my family carne asadas growing up, the flame, on the open grill, mesquite wood, charred chicken and sausage and ribs and fajitas and all the fixings that came with that, beans and rice and salsas and all that stuff.
Love that. Okay, seeing a common thread here. Yeah, absolutely. And you see the power of our memories is strong. And I want people to hold on to their memories, to their history. And I made it my work, to their history. And as I studied our food, my fondness for all things Negro only grew. I dedicated hours of hard, difficult, torturous study of Negro cuisine. The cheapest foods have been his staples, like crawfish, catfish, and mustard greens, along with molasses, cornmeal, pork, beans, and rice, were not by accident the backbone of his diet, but that somehow he managed to make a psychosis palatable. They took the scraps, what was on sale and wanted by others, and they made magic. They made dishes like calf's head soup, West Indian deviled crab, yam with hominy, known today as shrimp and grits. They knew the way into people's hearts wasn't through their head, but through their stomachs. And as I learned all of this culinary knowledge and history, my life's work suddenly became clear. I needed to research and write a cookbook dedicated to Negro cooking. And it's a need I never brought to fruition. You see, the truth is I never finished my cookbook. I started it 8 years before my death. But I couldn't finish it because I needed you all to fill in the blanks, to provide me with the missing recipes and history my book needs. I know the importance of books, how they safeguard our history and serve as proof that we all existed, that we all sat here in this space and breathed the same air. So now I will take you on my journey to preserve our history, a mission that was left unfinished and is being erased as we speak. As I know your time is valuable, we shall begin with a quote. Negros no tienen historia, errores o logros notables. Blacks have no history, heroes, or notable accomplishments. To offer you some comfort, that quote is not my own. It belongs to my 5th grade teacher. I believe teaching is a sacred profession, having been a teacher myself. And on this particular day, my teacher was anything but saintly. When I asked her which historical Puerto Rican figures looked like me, that was her response. We've all been shaped by a teacher's words, from a gentle nudge to push us to work harder, to a loving note that affirmed our potential, that let us know that our teacher saw what we were capable of in the future. Or a teacher that tore us down, who made us feel stupid and said we'd never amount to anything. And as a young boy, I already understood the power in seeing yourself as someone else. There must have been a moment in your life when you turned on the television, opened a magazine, or read through a book and saw someone who reminded you of yourself, who made your dreams seem possible, someone who you looked up to, who gave you the drive to keep going. And as a child, I was eager to find that person for myself. I dove into my schoolwork, having a deep love of the written word, which was nurtured at home, where I was surrounded by the music of language. January 24th, 1874, 1 year after the abolition of slavery on the island of my birth, Puerto Rico. I was born to a father, Carlos Federico Schomburg, and if you were wondering how a man like me got the last name Schomburg, blame Carlos. My father was German, a merchant by trade, and my mother from St. Croix, a midwife named Mary Joseph. Together, they brought me into the world and to the island of Bridgeport. Through hurricanes, occupations, and political upheaval, Puerto Rico has remained my home and the center of my happiness. And as a boy, I was thought the coolest people on the island, the tabaqueros, the cigar workers. They may not seem cool, but they were the height of sophistication to 5-year-old me. Now I probably want to be like Bad Bunny. But back then, the tabaqueros rolled tobacco all day, drank rum while they worked, and talked about women to pass the time. Basically every straight man's dream. Shockingly, that's not what I was most interested in as a young boy. Don't get me wrong. I loved women. I couldn't stay away from them. But these men would pool their money together to pay a lector to read aloud in the factories. They did not know how to read, so they would pay to hear novels, newspapers, and speeches. They wanted to understand the written word because that knowledge would allow them to compete with the Spanish colonizers, who they had no choice but to work for. And through their drive, I learned my ABCs. And I learned the proper way to smoke a cigar, which made me the coolest kid on the playground. Was criollo. It was used to describe people who were born in one of the Spanish colonies with Spanish blood in their veins, but who would always be considered lesser than because they weren't a real Spaniard. And that's how I felt. On one hand, people made fun of my hair because it was different than my classmates, and other people assumed I was more privileged than my Puerto Rican peers just because I was mixed. In some people's eyes, I'm truly not Puerto Rican to this day, as my mother was born in the West Indies and my father was German. People are still trying to claim me as one of them, despite how I identify myself. So what do I need to do to be fully accepted? For people to see all sides of who I am. That torment drove me to use the new reading skills I had got from the tabaqueros. And I found hope in the stories of mixed race people like myself, as I learned that they succeeded despite not feeling like they belonged. None more so than Alexander Hamilton, who had a mother who was a colored woman. So one of our founding fathers was mixed, just like me. And if he could go on to be the star of a Broadway musical, anything was possible for me. Great figures like him eventually triumphed against the odds. And having this knowledge, my 5th grade teacher lit a flame under me. I chose to not only prove my teacher wrong, but to prove the world wrong. To show everyone that we do have a history that needs to be taught and celebrated. We need a collection of books, or list of books written by our men and women. If they lack style, let the children of tomorrow correct the omission of their sires. Let them build upon the crude work. Let them, because of the opportunities that colleges and universities grant, crystallize the crude work and bring it out flawless. That was from one of my most famous speeches. Racial integrity, a plea for the establishment of a chair of Negro history. I wish that speech wasn't relevant anymore, a product of its time. But we're seeing schools take Black writers up. Rappers say slavery was a choice, and we've already seen the fall of affirmative action. My teacher, all those years ago in San Juan, was already erasing history. And I was the boy upset by what they said, who had a point to prove. Some young people idealize superheroes. They want to be like the Black Panther. But my T'Challa was Benjamin Banneker, who was the son of former slaves and became a self-taught astronomer. He looked outward into the stars to dream of a bigger future for himself. And he inspired me to leave my small island and venture out into the big world. I felt trapped on Puerto Rico. Its beautiful shores and lush lands only discovered permission to pursue my dreams, to find the world history that I knew was hiding out in the open. I would have to take the leap of faith myself. And as I read more about the history of our people, New York emerged as a cultural crossroads I needed to explore. Generations of Puerto Ricans had already decided that the 5 boroughs of New York City was the place to be. So it was decided. I was to venture to los Estados Unidos, to Nueva York, to have my taste of a gran manzana, to pursue. I had to finish that book report. I arrived in Nueva York in 1891 as a 17-year-old. The cigar over the years and offered to give me a going-away present. I expected the finest Puerto Rican rum, the strongest tobacco our island had to offer. Instead, I got a letter of introduction. At first, it felt like getting a birthday card with no money in it, where you have to fake being happy, but really you're shocked that your grandma would be so stingy. But it turned out to be one of the best presents I ever got. Showing up to a new place can be scary, particularly when you don't speak the language of the land. New York was a huge cultural shock from my tiny island of Puerto Rico. Its busy streets made me long for the sandy shores of San Juan. Maybe some of you had the same shock when you got here. Did you love how noisy the streets were and the smell of garbage in the summer? Sinatra once said, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And I was already trying to get on a boat back home. Thankfully, I was introduced to one Flor Baerga, an amateur book collector and a staunch opponent of Spanish colonial rule in Cuba and Puerto Rico. The Spanish were ever present during my years in Puerto Rico, bringing in slaves so they could profit off of our sugarcane, tobacco, and coffee. Slaves that looked like me, that shared my complexion, my hair, and my ancestry. I would see boys my age enslaved, and here I was getting an education, albeit a flawed one. What could I do to free them? What could I do to change the system that took away their humanity? And Flor saw that confusion, that inner turmoil that I possessed, and said, I know what you need. You need a purpose, something to work towards. And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, want to fight for the freedom of your people? And I said, yeah. And he said, great. Just hide in the shadows, watch and learn. Okay? That was music to my ears. It was like I was 5 years old again. I was back at the local tabaqueros, hiding in the dark, creeping on their conversation as they discussed the business of the day. And the business of this day was revolution. I was fresh off the boat in New York City, and I decided to do what every teenager does and runs away from home. I became a revolutionary. I chose to join in the fight for the liberation of Cuba and Puerto Rico, and I didn't stop there. I even created my own political group. Nowadays, people create podcasts and YouTube channels. Back then, having a political group made you that dude. My group was called Las Dos Aldeas Club, and lots of people like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. I assisted Puerto Ricans in organizing assemblies, unions, and in street fighting tactics. Before I was even legally considered an adult, I came to the States to find our history. And here I was making history. My 5th grade teacher could kiss my ass. And the press said then, and still say now, that we Puerto Ricans were unfit for self-government. And I took to the streets to let my distaste be known. We Puerto Ricans were not consulted, neither in regards to whether or not we wanted to be part of the United States, nor concerning our national sovereignty. If left to determine our destiny, surely there will emerge competent leaders able to conduct our people through any emergency or danger which might come up. Why not try? I may have been young, but our young people have always been the ones leading the fight. And it's true now. And as history was happening, I turned 21. But unlike today, the legal drinking age in 1895 was 18 years old. So my rum drinking skills were already entering their prime. So my birthday was capped not with a shot of Bacardi, but by being in the room where it was happening. December 22nd, 1895, the first general meeting of the Cuban Revolutionary Board, Puerto Rico section took place. We were on 25th Street and 6th Avenue, now the site of a Two Bros Pizza, I'm told. And it was at this meeting that the design of the Puerto Rican flag was presented and approved. I don't know what you all were like at 21, but I certainly did not understand the magnitude of the moment, being more preoccupied with where my next meal was coming from. Nobody tells you that changing the world does not hit the same when your stomach is wrong. You see, the truth is, we just took the Cuban flag and inverted the colors to make the Puerto Rican flag because we thought, why work hard when you can work smart, right? But truly, we were paying homage to the bonds between our nations and the community that had formed between our people to write a new history of our shared connections. I was living on the Lower East Side among Puerto Ricans and Cubans while studying English at night and teaching Spanish to earn money. And it was in these circles that I met Jose Marti, who was known in Cuba as the father of the country and the apostle of Cuban independence. But to me, he was just a homie. Jose had the same passion for his work that I had. His love for his homeland was inspiring. He wrote, "Dos patrias tengo yo, Cuba y la noche, por son una las dos. No bien retira su majestad el sol, con largos velos y un clavel en la mano. Silenciosa Cuba, cual viuda triste me aparece." Jose was teaching me English at the time, so to translate as best I could, I miss Cuba. Look at what it's become. English just isn't a poetic language. Jose was mourning for his country and what it had become. Just like how many people feel about the United States right now. I looked up to Jose. I idolized him even. He was like the father figure I never had. We talked about life, love, and liberty. I felt like if Jose could use his poetry to speak truth to power, my dreams of uplifting my people's history was possible. But there's a reason, some people say, to never meet your heroes. When I read some of Jose's work, his essay, Nuestra América, piqued my interest most. When we think about the idea of our America and what that currently looks like, we might think of the division, the hate, the inequality that this land has become known for. But I chose to think of the dream that this nation once held for so many of us. And surely I thought Jose would think the same. He was writing specifically about his vision for his native land of Cuba, and his dream of unity and harmony resonated deeply with me. Until I came across these lines. There can be no racial animosity because there are no races. The black man who trumpets his race is like the white man who believes himself to be superior to the black man. I was in disbelief. I read the lines back, thinking my reading comprehension had to be off. Jose had seen firsthand the treatment of slaves in Cuba. For him to say there were no blacks and whites, only Cubans, was a slap in the face to me. One teacher in Puerto Rico had told me that my history did not exist, and now another teacher, Jose, was telling me that I, the black man, did not exist. I confronted Jose about it, And we argue going back and forth about the best way forward for our people. Arturo, you're making too much of this. Oh, am I? You people, you talk too much about race. It is not real. It is something the gringos made up. It is my experience made up. The way people treat me, the way they see me. You cannot win people over by lecturing them, by telling them everything they have done wrong. You have to give them some grace. How? By letting them erase our history? Oh, God, you're such a dreamer. I thought I was the poet and you the realist. You can't change everyone's minds. We fight, we struggle, we strive to. But some people can truly be lost causes. Some of you may agree that we talk about race too much as a society. But he said my reality, the reality of my people and people who look like me, was a lie, a creation of our imaginations. He was erasing the little history I had. So what that he was older, more knowledgeable, more poetic? He still could not hear me or see me. Those they ignited a flame inside me even more, a desire I had to celebrate all we as Black people have to offer. And this flame took over every fiber of my body. I began to call this flame a disease, a book hunting disease to be exact. I got at bookstores, looking over fragile pamphlets with torn covers, leather books, paper mics between the pages. What I wanted was not easy to find. But I knew clues to look for. Another man's treasure could have originated with my search. They sold me their junk for cheap, and I found countless treasures. Will you take a quarter for a published newspaper by Frederick Douglass? Yeah, pretty good deal. But for them, that was a steal, because that's what I paid at the time, because even his work was thrown in the trash at the time. Would you pay 25 cents for women's history? Yeah. Back then, that was too much, because why would anyone want to pay for the work of the first Black woman to have her poetry published, right? Phyllis Wheatley, who? I had to look in back rooms, basements, and bathrooms, and piles of garbage next to actual feces. Our history is the history of us all, not Latinx history, American history. It is world history. It is the history of civilization. What did I have to do to get people to understand that? Would you throw the remnants of ancient Greece in the incinerator? No, right? Would you throw the heirlooms of the British monarchy into a dumpster? No. My theory, you're like, maybe, right? Absolutely. What they do, right? My theory drove me to buy more trash to dig through. I wanted to be walking the streets of New York with pockets full of coins, jingling and jangling like the Mr. Softly song. And the treats I was after was history with chocolate sprinkles. But there was one problem. I was broke. Like many people in me, money was a mystery to me. So I had to get a job, and a good one. So in 1896, I began working for Bankers Trust Company of New York. And at this job, I supervised white men. Unheard of at the time for a Black man like myself. I supervised 11 white men in total. And for anyone who has ever had to supervise that many of my Caucasian brethren, it was lies. Before DEI, these white men would sit around and wonder, how to get this job? And I'd answer them in 3 different languages. Wall Street firms needed people like me to translate as they infiltrated Central America. Before they used us. Now they just used slave wages. Capitalism was trash then. It's still trash now. My mailroom job was not glamorous, but it covered the expenses of my book collecting. I went to work, got paid, and went hunting over and over until my entire apartment was full of my findings, which wasn't a problem until I started dating. Some of you date people with 5 roommates, and hey, no judgment. You do you, whatever floats your boat. But I was bringing ladies home and having to move paintings out the bathroom, take pictures of Civil War soldiers out the stove, take slave ship manifests out of the side table. Needless to say, the magic definitely was not happening in my tiny New York City apartment. So I had to go searching for a new place to live, where my collection would be safe, and the ladies would feel right at home. And my journey took me to the west side of Manhattan, to Black Bohemia, known better as San Juan Hill. Anyone here heard of San Juan Hill? Anyone saying yes? Heard of San Juan Hill? No? Heard of San Juan Hill? No? Okay. So for those of you who haven't, San Juan Hill was heaven. It was home to one of New York City's most vibrant music scenes where Blacks and Latinos lived together and could be found talking about everything from politics to poetry. You'd hear them on the street shouting, "Mayor Van Wyck is an asshole!" All New York City mayors are assholes. It's a requirement of the job. And people were right. The neighborhood extended from 55th to 69th Street. And it was a gumbo of people from all walks of life. It was a time of creation and racial collaboration. As Latin jazz echoed through the streets, transported me back to Puerto Rico and serving as our party anthem. And we partied hard. The Martha Hotel was our turn-up spot, and it was Studio 54 before Studio 54, as we partied one block south on 53rd Street. It was the only desegregated club in Midtown, where Black and white patrons intermingled on the dance floor. All that rug cutting laid the groundwork for what would become known as the Harlem Renaissance. But there were battles in San Juan Hill too, musical battles. Bebop and mambo battle for supremacy as our music made its way across the country and eventually across the world. The artistic seeds planted in San Juan Hill became jazz. The musical shuffle along, and even nurtured white artists like Eugene O'Neill, who called the Hill home. History was being made all around us. And you would think that this neighborhood, full of Puerto Ricans and African Americans, would have been the perfect place for someone like me. But to some of my fellow Latinos, I was one of them. To a point. To the Black people in San Juan Hill, I was just like them. To a point as well. They would ask me, "What do you call yourself? What are you?" And I would always respond, "I'm Afro-Boricua. My identity, my work defies traditional racial definitions. I lived a double life, not Black by U.S. standards, and for sure not white." People credit me with inventing this term Afro-Boricua, thus the term Afro-Latino. So, I hope my invention has given some joy to young people like me, who feel like they're not just anything, but a combination of cultures that swim inside of them. But this term was not accepted by the people of my community. I had to pick a side. Our histories weren't viewed as a shared struggle. There could only be one minority group that reigned supreme. My people were segregating themselves, just like so many people still do today, on our streets, on our stages, on our screens. Our stories are interconnected, despite what those in power would have us believe. How can we come together and finally show the world that our history is one of unity, not of division? Some people said, and still say, that I exiled myself from the Boricua community, because after Cuba and Puerto Rico were taken over by the U.S., the liberation movements disbanded, and my priority shifted from their liberation to uplifting the African diaspora. I was only holding up both my identities in equal footing. I hunted for the history of Black people, which included my fellow Boricuas and any other groups in our diaspora. My book hunting disease drove me to dig through newspapers, theater programs, literary magazines in search of lost treasures. I even revisited my favorite book as a child, The Three Musketeers. And I discovered that its writer, Alexander Dumas, was a Black man. Did you know this? You did you? No. When you look after the show, he has an afro with crazy hang time. And I was aghast. What would I have done to have known that back in Puerto Rico? Maybe I wouldn't have had to imagine so hard that I was the young hero joining the Musketeers' fight for justice. And perhaps, most surprisingly, I learned Beethoven was part African. He had a perm and everything, and it was laid. So there was African influence in the Fifth Symphony. Symphonies around the world have been celebrating Black history. It did not even know it. And think about the amazing story we would be able to tell about the man in the 1700s who, despite being part African and partially deaf, would go on to be one of the greatest composers who ever lived. All of this history was dug up in San Juan Hill. My work that I set out to do was happening. Have you ever accomplished your dreams and thought, what now? This is the moment I've been waiting for, and it's not what I expected? Why do I feel so unsatisfied? I feel that way because all of my work can be taken away at a moment's notice, buried again because of one man's ambitions. If you're sitting there wondering why you have never heard of San Juan Hill, it's because it no longer exists. In 1959, 20 years after my death, Robert Moses, the infamous urban planner, raised our community in the homes of more than 7,000 families and 800 businesses. This was the third time in New York City short history that Black people have been displaced from their established communities. First, 1857, Seneca Village was displaced through eminent domain to make room for Central Park. Second, 1910, the Tenderloin District was evicted to build Penn Station. As you walk through Central Park or through the turnstiles of Penn Station, think of the history that's under your feet, the dreams that were forged on the very ground on which you now walk. How can we honor that legacy? What can we do to restore what's been lost? It's not enough to do a land acknowledgement, to pay tribute in words. How can we repay the debt owed to these people's descendants? And despite losing their homes, those families still carry on the legacy of their communities. And long before destruction would befall San Juan Hill, I found comfort in something, or someone who waited for me at home. My wife, Elizabeth Hatcher. Her caramel skin and southern accent made my heart sing. She was a young girl who came to New York City from Virginia to make a future for herself. Kenyon trying to do the same. Elizabeth was off by my apartment of ancient artifacts, and that was enough for me to know she was the one. We married, had 3 children, and made a life on West 62nd Street. She was my rock, the one who made my impossible dreams seem possible. 4 years after arriving in New York, I was a husband and a father in a home where English, twanged with my wife's southern cadence, was the language spoken in the house. I never quite picked up English from Jose Marti. It's hard to learn from someone who you have a grudge against. But I was learning a language by immersion again, just like I had learned my ABCs from the tabaqueros in Puerto Rico. And my wife and her family members became my new teachers. All right, Arturo, we're going to teach you 3 important words now. There, and there. Them teaching me English didn't go so well, but I was a straight A student when it came to my lessons on Afro-North American food. Cornmeal, catfish, and collard greens transported me to the South. So much so that I had to venture down south myself to see what food I had been missing out on. Y'all ever took the train to go to a restaurant you love, or dream of going on a vacation to eat a certain kind of cuisine that makes your heart sing? Well, I love Black food so much, I drove below the Mason-Dixon line during segregation. You know the food slaps if you're willing to be oppressed for it. The dirt of the South was still stained with blood from the Civil War, not 30 years prior, and I was predictably turned away from a hotel because of the color of my skin. Have you ever wished you could give someone a taste of their own medicine? I know I have. So I decided to take a page out of their book and sue the hotel for discrimination. And to many people's surprise, I won. Those former Confederates were so red in the face, they were the same color as the hats their descendants wear today. Want to know the secret to my success? I spoke fluent Spanish. See, in the South, Negroes were African American, but these Southern folks had never heard of a Negro Puerto Rican. Apparently, neither did the law. So it paid to be mixed, literally. And thought I'd be the toast of 62nd Street. Hey, my world had been turned upside down. My mother, Mary Joseph, had died. Not soon after that, my wife, Elizabeth, dead at age 22. Next, my son Arturo Alfonso Jr. died in infancy. My books had taught me so much about life, but they could not teach me how to grieve. I have read so much about the loss of life suffered by our people over the centuries, but the reality of being a single father to two children was nothing I could prepare for. Normally, you would lean on the people around you when times are tough, but I was the Boricua who wanted to hang with the blacks, the weird black man with a funny accent who spoke Spanish. I had no community. I had to mourn 3 loved ones alone. Part of my legacy had already been wiped off the map, never to be seen or heard from again. Even with my 2 living sons to keep me company, saying without Mom, Elizabeth, and Arturo Jr. New Year's Day rolled around and people were in the streets celebrating, drinking and shouting to celebrate the arrival of the new century, the year 1900. Unlike Y2K, people didn't think the world was going to end. We were looking forward to a fresh start, to leave the turmoil of the 1800s in the past, which I desperately needed to do. And the Great Migration gave me a wave to ride to a new beginning. Lots of black folk were doing what Elizabeth once did, as they left the South to venture to the big industrial cities of the North. If there's a good kind of gentrification, this was it. With this migration, I am building a community to not have to mourn in isolation. Dreamed about a bright future for themselves, just like I once did in Puerto Rico. So I took the Great Migration north from the West 60s of Manhattan to the place that would become my North Star, Harlem, New York. First, I had to move my family and my collection of items. You ever see those videos of people moving their furniture on the subway? And you think, what is wrong with you? Well, I'm one of the trailblazers who showed people that you can move everything you own onto one train. which were, and sometimes still are, considered separate. And people began to take notice. Yo, you hear about this Schomburg cat? That guy walking around juggling all the books. Yeah, he must be obsessed with something, because my library don't even have that many books. Arturo, you speak Spanish, right? Think you could introduce me? Arturo, why don't I introduce you to my friend Marcus? Marcus Garvey. You probably know the name because there's a boulevard in Brooklyn named after him and a park in Harlem, but Garvey, Marcus Garvey, was the leader of the Pan-Africanism movement who sought to unify and connect people of African descent worldwide. He was my black brother for real, and he needed a translator to explain the events happening in Cuba to him. Marcus was a giant among men who strutted down 125th Street with more feathers in his head than Big Bird. And his brass button uniform could have been designed by Gucci. He once said, the people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And I thought, I gotta step up my metaphor game. Hanging with Marcus was a sign that I was making it. But with each step I took forward, there were those who tried to stymie my progress. I was better speaking English than writing, having never mastered I before E except after C, because it's not a real rule, and English is stupid, and there are plenty of people who gave me flack for it, especially the black intellectuals of the time, like W.E.B. Du Bois, co-founder of the NAACP, who I had known during my years in San Juan Hill, who would rewrite my pieces when I would try to publish it in major journals, without asking me. I know there are some artists in this room. So how would you feel if someone rewrote your work without consent? Yeah, that face says it all, right? You're pissed off. It's a major violation. W.E.B., who claimed to be for the advancement of colored people, but said about me, my good loyal friend Schomburg gathered facts, not right. He was trained in Puerto Rico on fluent Spanish, and his English is impossible. To be elite in his eyes was to have a formal education. He didn't care about real-world experience. You had to have the time and money to get a degree. You ever meet someone like this in your field? On the surface, they're all about community, when really they're all about themselves. That was W.E.B. for me. He was the first black person to earn a PhD from Harvard, and he loved talking about what an honor it was. Or, in his words, the honor, I assure you, was Harvard's. I may have despised the guy, but that quote was kind of a flex. I know he's our ancestor, and we have to respect our elders. I say, fuck that. Our ancestors need to be scrutinized too. They didn't know everything, myself included. Marcus Garvey once said, real men laugh at opposition. Real men smile when enemies appear. So I was not going to take W.E.B.'s taunts either. I shot back. The university graduate is wont to overestimate his ability. From the machinery that endows him with the parchment and crowns him with knowledge, he steps out into the world to meet the practical men with years of experience and mother wit. That may not sound like much now, but back then, that was bars. Tupac could never release a diss track that good. And even though I was standing up for myself, I was still an immigrant who spoke English as a second language. So I would always be second in their eyes. And I tried my best to get them to accept me. I went as far as changing my name. I changed my name from Arthur to Arturo. I changed my name from Arturo to Arthur to try to ingratiate myself to these intellectuals. And think about how many people like me have changed their name to assimilate. What's in a name? Shakespeare said. Well, an entire history, a lineage of identity. And I was willing to change my history so that these people could see all that I had to offer. And to make matters worse, I did not let my children learn Spanish because I wanted them to assimilate as well. to protect them from the discrimination I dealt with, the way people looked down upon me, how they assumed I was lesser than despite my accomplishments. Think of how many people have dealt with parents with good intentions, only to disconnect you from your roots. And at the same time, my use of Spanish had been dulled from years of living in the United States, which embarrassed me in front of Spanish-speaking intellectuals. They nitpicked at my Spanish, telling me, le tradujo del inglés la palabra library y puso librería. Y librera en español quiere decir bookstore. So the laugh was on you. It was a small mistake, but I was still being bullied on both sides, not fitting in with the Black intellectuals, and my fellow Latinos also pushing me aside. All I was doing for all of us, to connect us, to unify us. But all these people saw was someone who did not have to jump through the same hoops they did. And instead of making the road easier for the people behind them, they decided to raise the bar even higher. So it was clear, if I wanted to preserve the history of my people, I had to do it without a seat at their table. So I called on a few friends I had, like John Edward Bruce. I was. John was a civil rights activist, and we banded together to found the Negro Society for Historical Research. And we acquired over 3,000 objects that documented the history of people from across the African diaspora. Until history had a funny way of repeating itself. Once again, we had no home for all of our stuff. So instead of storing everything in our homes, we had a groundbreaking idea. What if we asked our friends and family to store items in their houses? Community is important after all. I mentioned New York City apartments were small, but when you have access to dozens of apartments, Manhattan mini storage could never. But as time passed, these friends started pressuring us to find a proper home for our stuff. Turns out that people don't like it when you take up all their closet space. So I took my sweet time returning their calls. It was nice to live in a time before cell phones. And while we looked for a home for our work, I got to work disproving the notion that I was just a collector. I regularly reviewed newly published books written by the same intellectuals who said I wasn't as cultured as they were. Should I have been petty and given them a terrible review? Would you? It would have been nice to have these Ivy League showboats bow down and kiss my ring. Have Carter Woodson, known today as the father of Black history, pay homage to the work that I was doing. But I was a fair critic. Don't worry. But did this act of kindness help these elites accept me? Of course not. These intellectuals began to say that to be Negro was to be American. Where did that leave foreign Negroes like me? Where did I fit in? I am part of Harlem as much as anyone else. I'm a part of America as much as anyone else. And I shouted from the rooftops, the American nation opened its doors to the foreign-born. And these people helped in a great measure to make the nation what it really is today. But it did not matter. I did not know who to turn to for support. And when all else fails, you turn to the people who deal with heartbreak and rejection the most. Artists. No one knows pain like an artist, and maybe no one longs for community. And a group of young Black writers invited me to the first meeting of their informal guild. It wasn't the invite to the Illuminati I was looking for. That wouldn't come to the 1930s. They don't call me the Sherlock Holmes of Negro history for nothing. But the young poets, County Cullen, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Claude McKay, names you should look up later, were a ragtag group of artists. And I told them, people are so insecure that they had to take you out of history. Why they could not stand for your history to compete with theirs. They just nodded and gave me that confused look that young people throughout history give old people like me. But one poet and I did become very close. A poet by the name of Langston Hughes. I became a sort of mentor to him, and he was unquestionably a talented man. And he would recite, "I too am America," right before he asked me to borrow some money. His poetry was beautiful, but I couldn't wait for him to find some success so I could get my money back. Don't you miss being so young that people would hook you up sometimes just because? The old lady at checkout saying, "Oh, don't worry, sweetie, it's on me." Now I'm older, I'm expected to pay. Word to the wise, do not grow old. Some things do not get better with age. But my hunt for items related to our history aged like fine wine. Langston's friend, Claude McKay, said I had a bloodhound's nose because I was so good at sniffing out our history. I did the sniffing, and these young men did the writing, and we all benefited from it. I traveled on lecture tours and collecting missions, spending 8 months out of the year building my collection. If they were frequent flyer miles back in the day, I'd be platinum status for sure. I traveled to Russia and found evidence of the African ancestry of Alexander Pushkin. It turns out he was a light-skinned brother. And I wrote to Langston during my trip to report my findings, and he wanted to talk about his life. Dear Mr. Schomburg, I hope your trip has been a fruitful one. I am now writing a poem called Let America Be America Again. I look forward to sharing with you when I return. Dear Langston, look, that sounds great. I'm Aldridge in the Book of Shakespeare plays, willing to have the people of the USA enjoy this picture. If not, can a copy be had? My work was my life, and everyone knew it. My friend John, who became a sort of mentor to me, encouraged my work. If John was Superman, I was Batman. Two superheroes working together, despite our differences, for the greater good. And our wives teamed up too. If we were the Justice League, our wives were the Suicide Squad, put together to keep us humble. They teamed up to say enough is enough. The book collecting has got out of hand. One upset wife is an issue. But two, John and I were in deep shit. My bloodhound knows I got a little out of control. So much so that my wife had a hard time carving out living space for our children. I get it. Kids want to run around, which is hard to do when you have priceless sculptures, paintings, and artifacts laying around the house. But I thought it's a good thing. Think of how many children don't have access to culture, to opportunity. My children were growing up with culture right in their living room, and dining room, and bathrooms. Yes, I had documents piled up in the bathroom. At one point, our tub was filled to the max with documents. Think about how much water we saved not bathing. Thankfully, we had a bigger tub these days. I had moved on from living in Harlem. Harlem would always be home to me, but it was time for me to break away from the masses and do my own thing. I made my home in Bedford-Stuyvesant, known to you all most likely as Bed-Stuy. And long before Biggie would say, "Live from Bedford-Stuyvesant, the livest one," I lived on Casioso Street in Brooklyn, and it became the center for the exchange of ideas and information in the neighborhood. Artists came by to view my collection, so gone were the days where I begged for a seat at their table. I was building my own, which was perfect because we were entering the roaring 20s. The 1920s was an era of social revolution, and perhaps the 2020s will turn out to be one too. The jazz age took hold as flappers shook what their mama gave them. Women wore short skirts, drank, and said unladylike things for the first time freely and openly. Life was good, and I was partying too, or what I call my kind of party. I joined a committee to start a Negro division at the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library. Might sound more than you, but nobody gets lit by it like a bunch of librarians, let me tell you. And my work was growing. And my platform was increasing. I gave lectures, speeches, and spoke truth to power to whoever would hear it. The boy who didn't know English was now commanding a stage. I proclaimed, The American Negro must remake his past in order to remake his. The American Negro must remake his past in order to make his future. History must restore what slavery took away, for it is the social damage of slavery that the present generations must repair and offset. That's from what most people consider to be my masterpiece. The Negro digs up his past, and I'm still digging up our past. There's places in this country, Florida, where books now say that we benefited from slavery, where people can opt out of learning the history of queer people, as if history is not something we all can learn from, to not repeat the sins of the past. And I said all the way back then, there is a definite desire and determination to have a history, well documented and administered as a stimulating and inspiring tradition for the coming generations. The Negro has been a man without a history because he has been considered a man without a worthy culture. I dropped the mic on that. I said I was preserving all of our histories, and all of our histories are worthy of being shared, being celebrated. And you all have the power to celebrate them, however you see fit. But the one history I had neglected to celebrate was the history of my family. I said my work was my life, and that was a failure of mine. My work gave me a purpose. It gave me a status in life. And actually, I should have been pouring myself into my children's lives. When I look back on the boy I was in Puerto Rico, I think about my father and how he failed me, how he burdened me with being mixed, not full, and how he magnified my loneliness, and how I had repeated the same mistakes with my children. To be buried. I talked to my wife Elizabeth about it. This was the third Elizabeth that I've been married to at this point. Yeah, all my wives were named Elizabeth. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe the name Elizabeth made me think of royalty. That my wives would give me status that I always longed for, but never quite achieved in life. Elizabeth III kept it very real with me. She said enough is enough. It's either your books or your family. She would get so mad when she tried to dust around the house, and I tell her to leave my desk alone because I had everything organized in a very particular way. I had everything organized by size and color. And she went as far as calling me a hoarder. Yeah, at my height, I possessed thousands of books, manuscripts, etchings, and portraits, but my collection was fire. Some of you might have had that collectible growing up that made you feel special. That Beanie Baby, that Tamagotchi, that Charizard Pokemon card. My Charizard card was Lincoln's Bible. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, Mr. Top Hat himself. When I held that holy book, I thought about the free Black people who handed the Bible to him during the Civil War and how I was now able to share that history with the youth of our nation. So Elizabeth asking me to give away these priceless items was ridiculous. Wouldn't you understand if your husband filled your house with the history of the world? Maybe. Would it be okay with you if your medicine cabinets were filled with historic treaties? Maybe. If under the sink next to the Febreze was manuscript? Yeah, okay, sure. Okay, you are way nicer than she was. Because I knew I had no choice. I gave it all away. Anyone who has ever had to get rid of their personal collections will feel my pain. Your old VHS tapes, your old baseball cards, finally admitting that your Cabbage Patch Kids was a terrible investment. I felt so wrong selling my life's work. Some people said money heals all wounds. Not completely true. It can't be like ibuprofen and dull the pain. In 1926, the Carnegie Corporation purchased my collection for $10,000, $200,000 in today's money, which sounds could change the lives of some of the people in this room. At least nearly enough artifacts and documents I had collected. Our history is worth far more than that. Thankfully, Andrew Carnegie decided to donate my collection to the New York Public Library, and it became the cornerstone of the new division of Negro history, literature, and prints, known today as the Schomburg Center. My family was so happy. They could actually use the bathroom in peace. Marie Kondo would be so proud of me. And I was free to live my life and be myself. And I was free to take a vacation, to bring my family overseas and give them all the experiences I never had as a young boy in Puerto Rico. To travel to Spain, Cuba, France, and England, Germany, France again. I just love the Clippers. And traveling to Cuba allowed me to reclaim a piece of history that I had given away. My name, Arturo. I could be myself again. I was Arthur as I fought to be accepted, to get people to see me for who I was, who I could be. But now, I was Dr. Schomburg, as some people call me. Not because I had a PhD from university, but for my wealth of real-world experience. So through WEB, I had an honorary doctorate, which was better than his Ivy League one. But when you're on vacation, sometimes you get souvenirs to remember all the good times. So I've been looking for souvenirs where most people go. The archives. Because my work, our work, is never finished. People tell us we need to amplify ancestors, to look to the past because we might find the answers for the future. Which is part of the reason people seek to ban the books I collected. They want to control what the future will look like. Because they fear the world in which we all know not what we're capable of, but what we've already done. If a book is a garden carried in a pocket, I want our world to be covered in foliage. From the isolated plantation to the crowded ghettos, we have to preserve the relics of our history and document how far we've come. Today, I would collect Jordan Peele screenplays, Michael Jordan sneakers, Beyonce's dresses, pieces of art that might reach those who might never open a rare book. And though I'm long retired and working my new job behind the pearly gates, I hold on to the people I've met and the stories I've heard and the legacy I leave you all to build on. You are my legacy. You are the little boy from Puerto Rico, the boy who wanted to preserve history and ended up rewriting it, who searched for the perfect cornbread recipe, but was never satisfied, who never finished his cookbook, but added some new chapters thanks to you. And what you do with my legacy now, keep it alive, is in your hands. End of play. Yeah. You did incredible. Oh, thank you.
It's fun.
Yeah. We're